continue now at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 27b. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked whether Simonim are Dorais or Drabanan, and the Gemara says the nafkamina is Liahadure get Isha b'Simonim. Would we return a get Isha divorce document if we had Simonim? Yamr Doraisa Madrin, and if you say Simonim are Doraisa, so then we would return it. V'Yamr Drabanan, but if you say Simonim are Drabanan, Kiyav Drabanan Takanta b'Mamona. The Rabbanan only make such a takana, meaning to return, that they say that you return based on simonim by monetary issues. Aval be surah lo of it, but when it comes to Isra, they would not make lo of Rabbanan takan to the Rabbanan, would not make such a takana. Rashi explains liadure get, to return a get, that means sha'avad min hashliach hamavio kodem shenasam la. We're returning it to the shliach who lost it. There was a shliach delivering the get, and he lost it, to return it to that shliach before he gives it to her. Again, if it's doraisa, we would do so. If it's Derabanan, that Takana Derabanan would apply to Mammon, but it would not apply to Isser. Rashi says, Takanta lekaman b'shmaitin mefarish mahi. The Gemara later on in the Sugya will explain what the Takana is. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from our Mishnah, Afasim lahaisa bichlal kolelu. It says again, the garment would have been included in the general idea of lost objects. But lama yotza, so why is it that the pasuk takes it out, specifies it, lahakesh elav v'lomar lach, to compare things to it and say to you the following halacha, masim lam yuchedesh sheyesh la simonin v'yesh la tovin. Just like a garment is unique, it has simonim and it has people claiming it. And chayiv l'hachriz, one is obligated to announce it. I've called davar sheyesh lo simonin v'yesh lo tovin. So to anything which has simonim and has people claiming it, chayiv l'hachriz, one is obligated to announce. So it says over here, essentially, that the pasuk is teaching us the concept of simonim. It seems like simonim is doraisa. This proof was mentioned in Rashi and the previous Amud, and the Gemara rejects the proof and says, no, Tana Tovin, it's Strichale. It could be that the Tana of the Mishnah really was focusing on the idea that it has to have Tovin. That's really what we're learning from the Pasuk. And Simonim Kedei Naspa. Simonim was just added in. It was thrown in there for no real reason. Rashi explains. But Mamona, first of all, the Hefker, Bez, and Hefker, again, it's possible for the Rabbanan to make the Takana Dirabbanan of Simonim because of Hefker, Bez, and Hefker. That just goes on the general idea that maybe Simonim are Dirabbanan. Tovin, it's Strichale, really the Tana is focusing on people claiming it, meaning Kura L'Tovin Asa, meaning the Pasuk is coming to teach that you need to have someone claiming. V'lemute midi de yayish v'afkri, that would exclude a situation where the original owner gave up hope and made it ownerless. There, of course, you would not have to return it. Kedei Nasba below Mikr, Kedei Nasba means to say that has nothing to do with the Pasuk. Elas Mechinu Akrabi, we're just making it like an asmachta on the Pasuk, but really it might be a Takana Midrabanan in terms of Simonim. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof, Chamor b'simone ukaf. It says that a donkey, so you can use the simonim of the saddle. And Rashi says, Tashma du ukminon le'el chamor. We said earlier, in the Sugya on the previous summit, we said, what's the word chamor for? L'simone ukafas. It's coming to teach us the concept that you can use the simonim of the saddle to return the donkey. Clearly, we were talking about simonim over there, and we're learning it from the pasuk, from the word chamor in the pasuk. So it seems like simonim are doraisa. And the Gemara says, no, ema be'edei ukaf. What we really meant to say was witnesses on the saddle. Rashi says, ema be'edei ukaf im yesh edim hamakirin betzvias ayin le'ukaf shushalo, meaning witnesses recognize the fact that this saddle is his. Machzirin lo esachamor, we would return the donkey to him based on the witnesses, not based on the simonim. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the Mishnah later on, V'hoya imcha derosh achicha, so it says that the lost object is with you until your brother seeks it out. V'chisal al daitcha sheyitinenu lo kodem shidershenu, do you think that you're going to give it to him before he seeks it out? Ela darshe, what it really means to say is you have to investigate him. Im ramai hu oeno ramai, is he a liar, is he not a liar? And how are you investigating? My lab is simonim, aren't you investigating to see if he's able to provide simonim? It seems like simonim are doraisa. And the Gemara says, lo no be'edim, you're investigating him through witnesses, through edim. And Rashi says, darshu v'hachi mashma adrosh achicha, so ad droshcha esachicha. You have to search out your brother, you have to investigate him. And the Gemara says, be'edim, it's not simonim, it could be with witnesses, sheyavi edim, shehu shalo, that he will bring witnesses that the item is his. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Mishnah in Meseches Yevamis, Ein me'idin ela al partzuf haponim im hachotim. When the witnesses testify on a deceased individual, they're testifying and they're identifying who it is so that his wife can remarry. They have to testify that they recognize his face together with his nose. Afa b'sheyesh simonin begufa v'kelav. And even though there are simonim on his body and simonim on the clothing, that is not good enough. And the Gemara says, Shmami, no, we see from this Mishnah, simonim lav doraisa. Don't we see from this Mishnah that simonim is not doraisa? That's why that testimony only using simonim is not good. And the Gemara says, Amri, they say the answer to that. Over here, we're talking about particular simonim, that these particular simonim are not good. It could be simonim in general are good, but here we're talking about gufo de'orech v'gutz. Let's say simonim of his body, that he's tall or short. That's not enough of an identifying mark, and that's why it doesn't count. Or kelev, let's say his clothing, that's a different problem. The chayshin and l'sheila, we're afraid maybe he lent out his clothing to someone else. And the Gemara says, but if we're concerned that he lent out his clothing to someone else, chamor b'simani ukuf heichimadrin. And how is it that a donkey with simanim on the saddle, how is it that we return the donkey based on that? Again, we should say that the saddle was lent to another owner, to another donkey. And the Gemara says to that, Amri, they say, ukaf lo she'uli inshi uchva. When it comes to a saddle, people don't borrow a saddle, misham de kamisakev le'lechamra, because if it doesn't fit right, it actually wounds the donkey. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another answer in terms of why the simonim are not good in that Mishnah in Yevamos on the clothing, because Kela bechivri of a sumki, we're talking about saying that the clothing are white or red. Again, that's not a real siman that identifies anything, and that's why that particular siman is no good. And Rashi explains, you don't testify about a person who died in order that his wife should be allowed to remarry. Parts of panav shuim achotim. You have to be able, the witnesses have to be able to see his face with his nose. Da'orach o goats, saying that he's tall or short is not a good siman. She'ein ze siman. Shaharbe aruchim v'gotzim yesh. There's a lot of people that are tall and short. Kelev is begadav, his garments. Chashinan shama hishilam la'acher. There's a concern maybe he lent his garments to someone else. V'yoso acher rosh hameis. And there was that other person that we saw that has died. And then we said chivre o sumchi, to testify, let's say the clothing are white or red. That's not good. Ein ze siman. That's also not a siman. Shaharbe ko'el yesh. There are many clothing that are these colors. But the Gemara continues, what about that which we learned in the following brisa? Matzah kasher bekiso ba'arnik, if he finds a get that he lost, this is talking about a shliach who loses the get, and he finds it tied to his money pouch or to his purse, uvitabas, or to his signet ring, o shematzu bein kelev, or he finds it among his vessels, afilu lizman meruba, even if it's been a long time. Normally if a person loses a get and finds it after a long time, it's problematic, because we think what he found might have been a different get of somebody with the same name. So in this case, if he finds it tied to his money pouch, etc., even if it's been a long time, kosher, it's going to be kosher. And so the Gemara now asks, if it enters your mind to say, that we are concerned that somebody might have lent something out, if he finds it tied to his money pouch, amai kosher, why should it be kosher? We should be concerned that maybe he lent out his money pouch, and then that person he lent it to attached a different get of the same name, and so maybe that's what's going on over here. That should be a concern. And the Gemara says to that, Amri, they answer to that, kisva arniki, when it comes to a money pouch or a purse, v'tabas or a signet ring, lo mishali inchi, people don't lend those out. Kisva arniki mishum de misamni, they don't lend out a money pouch or a purse because that is a bad omen. V'tabas, and the signet ring they don't lend out, mishum de mizayef, because you can use that to forge things. And Rashi explains, Matzu kasher bekis shalo ba'arniki, if he finds that it's tied again to his money pouch or his purse, shliach hamevi get, this is talking about a shliach who's delivering a get, v'yavad heimenu, when he loses it, la'achar zman matzu kasher bekis shalo o ba'arniki, and then after some time he finds it tied to his money pouch or his purse, etc., bein kelev, or among his vessels, klei tashmisha shebebeso, these are the vessels in his house, afilu lizman meruba, even if it's been a long time, afagav d'tnan, even though we learned in the Mishnah in Meseches Gittin hamevi get, v'yavad heimenu, that if a person is delivering again, then he loses it, matzah lizman meruba pasul, if he finds it after a long time, it's pasul, but in this case over here, it's kosher, because again, it's attached to one of his items, we can assume that's the right get, but the Gemara says if it's really true that we're concerned that somebody might have lent something out, so nechash l'she'elu, we should have the same concern over here that he lent this out. Shema hishel kiso la'acher v'hu kasher. Well, maybe he lent his money pouch to somebody else, and that person tied a different get to the money pouch. And the Gemara then said these are things that people don't lend out. The mesamni, first of all, it's a bad omen to lend out one's money pouch or purse. Minach shivomer simin lo'adam shemashil kiso shemocher lamazolo. It's considered a bad omen because the person is lending out his money pouch. It's as if he's selling him his mazel. It's as if he's selling him his fortune. The mezayif, and it's also people don't lend out their signet rings because people will then people can use it to forge. Because each person would have a distinct distinct signature with his ring. When somebody would send something, the way he would do it is he would seal it with the ring. Therefore, a person doesn't lend out that ring, because then that other person can use the ring to essentially forge the things that the person is sending out. And the Gemara continues, let us say that it's a machlokas tanoim, the issue of whether simonim is dorais or derabanan, from the following brisa, ein me'idin ala shuma. It says you're not allowed to testify on a mole. That's talking about when they're trying to identify a person who's dead in order to allow his wife to remarry. So the Tanna Kama says that does not count as good testimony to identify the person. Elazar ben Mahavoy omer me'idin ala shuma, but Elazar ben Mahavoy says you could testify on the mole. And the Gemara says, my lab, aren't they arguing about this very issue? The Tanna Kama savar simon derabanan, and the Tanna Kama hold that simonim are derabanan, that's why you can't testify on the shuma. Elazar ben Mahavoy savar simon doraisa, and Elazar ben Mahavoy holds that simonim are doraisa, that therefore you could testify on the shuma. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, the kuli alma simonim doraisa. It could be that everybody agrees simonim are doraisa. V'hacha b'shuma Metziah beben gilo kamiflagi. Here they're arguing about, let's say you have a shuma, you have a mole. Is that going to be common on anyone else born under the same constellation? That's what they're arguing about, because if other people born under the same constellation will have the same siman, it's not going to be a good siman. Mar savar shuma Metziah beben gilo. One holds that the shuma can be found under anyone who's born under the same constellation. Umar savar shuma ein Metziah beben gilo. The other one holds that the shuma is not going to be frequently found among someone who is born under the same constellation. Ibai same, if you want, I could say the kuli alma shuma ein Metziah beben gilo. Everybody agrees the shuma is not going to be common among the ben gilo, among someone born under the same constellation. V'hacha b'simonin ha'asuyin l'shtanos la'achar misa kamiflagi. Here they're arguing about simonim that can change after a person's death. Mar savar simonin asuyim l'shtanos la'achar misa. One says these simonim can change after a person's death, therefore they're not reliable. Mar savar, the other one holds simonin ein asuyim l'shtanos la'achar misa. The simonim are not going to change after a person's death, and therefore they are reliable. Ibai saying, if you want, I could say the kuli alma shuma ein asuy l'shtanos la'achar misa. Everybody agrees that the shuma is not going to change after death. V'simonim derabanan, and simonim are derabanan, so therefore why should it be good? V'hacha b'shuma siman muvaku kamiflagi. Here they're arguing whether the mole is considered to be a clear-cut siman above the level of just a regular siman. Mar savar shuma siman muvaku. One holds that the shuma is considered a clear-cut siman. Umar savar shuma lav siman muvaku. And the other one holds that shuma, the mole, is not considered a siman muvak. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Im timtza lomar simonin lav doraisa. If we're going to say that simonim are not midoraisa, heichi mahadrinan avedita b'simonin. How is it that we return a lost object with simonim? And the Gemara answers, the nichole lemotze aveda dinahadr b'simonim. It's good for the person who finds the lost object to return it when the other person gives over the simonim. Ki heichi dechiyav delei l'didei. That way, when he loses something, nami nahadrulei b'simonim, we'll also return it to him with simonim. But the Gemara says to that, Amar le Rav Safra l'Rav. Rav Safra says back to Rav, V'chi adam osa tova li'atzmo b'maman she'ena shelo. Can a person do a favor for himself with money that's not really his? In other words, what do we care whether the person who finds the item, whether it's nichale, whether this is a good arrangement for him? He's not the owner of the object. And so the Gemara instead says, Ela rather nichale l'bal aved. It's actually good for the person who lost the item, l'meyav simonin u'lemishkale, to give simonim and take it that way. Meaning it's good for him. He's not worried that someone else is going to give a simon and take what is his. And the reason he's not worried is meida yada de edem lesla. He knows that he doesn't have any witnesses. It's very possible he loses an item. A person loses an item and doesn't have witnesses. Umeimar Amar, so he says to himself, Kuli alma lo yadi simonin muvhakim dida. Nobody else knows the clear-cut simonim of this object. Va'anoya ivna simonin muvhakim dida. And I'm going to say over the clear-cut simonim, v'shakalnala, and thereby I will take the item. And so therefore, essentially, people who lose things, there's a general agreement among all people who lose things that they should be retrieved with simonim. But the Gemara continues, but that which we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Echad halova mishlosha, if one person borrows from three, so there's one borrower, and somebody finds these three documents, yachzer lalova, so then you return the documents to the borrower because they all came from one person. Shlosha shalova min echad, if three people borrowed from one person, so now there's one creditor, so yachzer lamalva, you return to the lender, you return it to the creditor. So the Gemara asks, according to this logic, nichale lalova ladure le lamalva, is it good for the borrower that you're going to return it to the lender? In this case, you can't apply that logic that it's good for the person who lost the items. And Rashi explains, that which we learned in the Mishnah of Yamru lahachzer lo lamalva below Edom. Essentially, what are we saying in this Mishnah? That if there was one malva and three borrowers, you return it to the malva without witnesses. B'simin zeh, through this simin she'omer shalosha hayu, that he says that there were three documents, so mishalosha lovim, and there were three borrowers. V'min halova nafl, if these fell from the lova, shekvar pardon, that he already paid them off, mi nichale b'takana zu. In this case, would he be happy about this takana? Sheyitanim hamotzim l'chol haba v'nosin simoneim, that the person who finds them should give it to anyone who comes with the simonim. V'alo tov lo shu munachim biad hamotzim olamas. It would actually be better for the lova if the person who found them just kept them forever. Techol zman shehim biyadu, as long as they're in the hands of the person who found it. V'lo yachzir l'malva, and he doesn't return it to the malva. Hareim kisrufim, it's like it's burned. V'lo nichad l'hadir l'hu b'simonim, he doesn't want this to be returned with simonim. Dilma misrmi de yada malva b'simonim, because it's possible that the malva will know the simonim. So in a case of a lender and a borrower, it's not necessarily going to be pleasing for the one who lost it that the other one should be able to get it back with simonim. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said to him, Hasam Svarahu, in that case, it's just logical to do that. Echad halova mishlosha, if you have one person borrowing from three people, obviously yachzer lelova, you return it to the borrower. To gabe lova shchichi, gabe malva lo shchichi, it's more common that it would be by the borrower in this scenario, and it's not common that it would be by the lenders. Shma minami lova nafel, so you see that it fell from the borrower, and the other way around as well. Shlosha shalavu me'echad, let's say three people borrow from one person, so there's one lender, yachzer lemalva, you should return it to the lender. To gabe it's more common by the lender, it's not common by the borrower in that scenario. And Rashi explains, Hasam over there, b'simonin kihai, when you're talking about those kind of simonim, lo ichbes lan b'nichus ad lov, we don't even care if the lova agrees to it, if it pleases the lova, devadei lav minei nafel, because we know it did not fall from the lova, dehanach shtari achrini, mai bo gabe, what are the other documents doing by this lova? Only one of the three was from this lova, that's the whole point, and so there we know to return it to the malva, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph.